The last time we talked, I suggested that you create a sort of a personal inventory where you spend some time in self reflection and note each time you became homeless, that first day of that particular period of homelessness, and then work your way back and figure out why you got there, how you got there. Not that your wife or husband or boyfriend or girlfriend kicked you out, or that you were in a facility for addiction or mental illness, or even jail. That's the that's the reason. That's where that was the last place you were before you became homeless. But that's not the reason you became homeless. Take a look back at your behavior, at your choices, and just catalog it. Don't overthink it. Just just quickly come up with a list of the things that happened, and the choices you wish you could have done differently. Sometimes we make bad choices, but there are reasons behind those bad choices, and it's not just simply a matter of not doing that. So I thought it would be a good exercise and only fair that I do the same thing. So I'm going to tell you, without turning it into too much of a storytelling time, why I became homeless. So the first time I became homeless was during the what they call the Great Recession. So this would have been roughly 12 years ago or so. I was staying with someone, renting a room, who really had become, and out of kindness, had allowed me to stay much longer than she probably should have, because I had lost my unemployment had run out. I had no job. I was not looking for a job, and I couldn't pay my rent. So at some point, it just became necessary for me to leave, which I was more than willing to do. A friend took me in for a week and a half or so, and that um, ended, and I became homeless my first day. I wrote a piece on Open Salon actually the next day at the library called First Day Homeless, and that was actually uh, gained me quite a few readers. Again, we're talking from an experience that we can describe in a way that no one else can. So, another friend invited me to North Carolina, where I spent a few years staying in her home and other places. But be careful. Understand that when someone takes you in, they're being kind, and they're hoping that they're able to sort of help you in a way that you will um, recover from what you've gone through. But if you don't take the time to reflect on why you're in that position and just simply feel that you've survived and your problem is solved, two things are going to happen. One is at some point they're going to ask you to leave. And the second thing is, and it's also possible that they might actually do more damage than good. Not that that's their intention. I had a friend who took me in for a time in Texas, whose mother was so put off by my appearance when I arrived because I looked homeless. I was dirty. I was disheveled. I cleaned up. I found a job, but her mother, and this was my friend's house, not her mother's house. But anyway, her mother insisted that I had a bad body odor the entire time I was there, because the stigma of homelessness is that you are that person, that you are that person that was on the streets. You are that person that couldn't maybe maintain your personal hygiene as well as you would have liked. Um, and that's what happened. Eventually, she had so much stress from her mother that she had to ask me to leave. And this is someone that had asked me for years to move into her house just because she had bought a house and had extra rooms. She had invited me long before I became homeless. But at the end of the day, that experience was devastating for me. because first off, you're doing everything right, and yet it doesn't matter. And that's when you can get that cynicism, that bitterness, that, well, nobody cares if I do things right. They just don't want to help me, or I've already made so many mistakes that I can never recover from that. So, getting back to my point, the first time I was homeless, I made some bad choices. I lost my job. I wasn't as focused as I should have been on succeeding at my job. I was drinking, and I was engaged in a certain amount of what can be called magical thinking. Sometimes you make bad choices because you believe it's a good choice. So it was not recognizing the urgency of my situation and finding some sort of a job, getting some help with my alcohol abuse, and getting mental health um, treatment, as well as just taking care of my health in general. You can make bad choices just because you just don't feel good. And if you have high blood pressure like I did, you're putting your future at risk, because you could have a stroke, you could die, which of course would be the end of the future for you. But the point is, you're not valuing your own life. You are assuming that you can make these mistakes because after all you've been through, the least you should be allowed to do is to have a few drinks, to gamble. Back in those days, I had to take the bus up to Atlantic City. It's not like it is. It wasn't like it is now, where you can pretty much gamble anywhere. But all of those things were an exercise in denial and an exercise in magical thinking, where I thought, if I just hit that jackpot, then everything will be fine. And after all, don't I deserve that? The more I lose, the more I think I'm going to hit, I'm going to win. And that goes back to the principle I spoke about on the first video, which is, when you're in a hole, stop digging. Otherwise, the hole gets deeper and it's going to take a lot more time to get out. And that's basically what I did. Now, the next time after North Carolina, I went to Reno on a job transfer. So I was doing reasonably well in terms of being employed. But the job I had in North Carolina, I ran into trouble because I wrote about suicidal ideations, and because I would use my days off to become drunk. I was bored, I was lonely, and you can do great on your job, and you cannot drink during your work week. But then once the work week's over, you start drinking. In my case, that meant that I started posting things on Facebook. I started writing about things. And the thing is, if you start writing about, hey, I could just, climb up on the roof of the hotel where I work and jump. Just put it all over, get it over with. Well, two things are going to happen when you do that. Number one, you're probably going to get a call from the police, because somebody's going to report you. And then you're going to have to explain to the police, oh, you were just writing something, that it wasn't real. Or, as happened to me on other occasions, they actually take you away for 72 hours, which is not so pleasant either. But the second thing that happens, if you begin to talk about your despair in a way that makes it appear that you might harm yourself, people care about you. They don't want you to harm yourself. But as a business, they're more concerned about whether you might harm somebody else. It's not a stretch to say that someone who is looking to do violence to themselves could also do it to others around them. We've seen plenty of examples of that. So I ended up being invited. So I was in Reno, and I lost that job for that reason. I actually left a voicemail message. This was really dumb, but I was drinking, which is not an excuse, but it was a hell of a good reason to just let it all out. But with the assistant general manager, I left a message suggesting that his treatment of me may lead me to suicide. That's when I learned about the 72-hour hold in Nevada. Um, so that became a terrible situation. But I bounced back, found a job at a convenience store. But I was what I called at the time fatalistic. And what I mean by that, and apparently I may not be applying it exactly correctly, but is that I'm going to die. The situation is so grim that even if I am certain I'm not going to be the cause of my own death, that it's just a matter of time that my life has run its course. And the problem with that is that you talk that way around people. And so at some point, it becomes so normal to you, it becomes an indulgence that you don't even pick up on the fact that it's disturbing to talk that way. And so eventually I lost that job because I would drink on my days off, and sometimes payday was always my worst day. I mean, I got paid, I could go to the casino and drink all I wanted. But if I have to go to work the next day, the odds are that I'm going to be in a sense of despair, since I, likely would lose money. But I would also still have the afterglow, if you will, of the alcohol. So you literally are still somewhat drunk, and that's what happened at my convenience store job. So at that point, I knew. Now I was transitioning into what I call homelessness as a worst case scenario to homelessness as plan B. So this time I thought, I'll be homeless for a while. I'll figure it out. And I decided that I wanted to go back to LA where I'd worked before. It's a very tricky thing to go online and think, oh, that's the place where they're really going to help me out. Because, on websites, the shelters, the services are always very welcome to everybody. The reality is much different. Of course, Los Angeles is known as a real center of the homelessness crisis. So I stayed homeless in Reno for a few nights while I tried to raise money to get a one-way ticket to LA to be homeless. Which just sounds absolutely insane. That's what I did. And Reno was a place where law enforcement was very aggressive against you. There was really nowhere to go. Or at least I wasn't aware of anywhere to go. I wasn't really that experienced yet being homeless. So I went to LA, which was, you can look it up anywhere you like, and you can see that Skid Row is a pretty horrifying place, and not some place you should plan to go to be homeless. And that's when the friend in Texas invited me there that I mentioned before. And again, I spent the same amount of, I spent the usual year finding a good, decent job, doing well, having my housing situation collapse underneath through no fault of my own, and eventually losing my job for that same reason, where people were concerned about what I was posting on my days off, and they were afraid of me. Even though they liked me, I did a great job. And once again, I was out of work, and it was at that point that a friend invited me to Vegas. It's if you work in hospitality, it's a great place to go. The bus ride was about 30 hours or so, and on the way to Vegas, she let me know that she had changed her mind. So now I was going to Vegas with $400 in my pocket and nowhere to go. I'd never been there. So needless to say, I eventually ended up at in an emergency room after losing all of my money. And after being released from a facility after a week or so, they took me to the homeless shelter, the Catholic Charities homeless shelter. And that's when I had my longest term homelessness experience. So I could go more into that, but this is taking maybe longer than it should, but I hope you find it useful. Um, I was, again, taken in ultimately, eventually by a friend after having really a bad health scare and nearly dying of sepsis. And a friend took me in, and again, I got a job and then lost the job and began having trouble with my heart. So at that point, I couldn't pay my rent there, and I was put out and I was homeless again. So let's just reflect for a moment on my stories. Where do you see? Sometimes someone can tell you a story like this, and you can pick up on the patterns fairly easily. But for them, they don't always see it. They see it as one-time mistakes. Oh, if I just didn't drink so much when I'm off work. Well, that's not really the mistake. The mistake is I never reached out to get help for that. I never told anybody I was having that problem. I never tried to, I'm not really big on AA, but if that's what you want to do. So it wasn't, so clearly my issue was alcohol, mental illness, to be sure, and just recklessness, and just that I was disconnected from society. I had become indifferent to society's rules of behavior, and I was running the risk of dying on the streets or going to jail or any other things you can think about that would be terrible. But the bottom line was that I not only made these mistakes, but I decided that I deserved to suffer for them. While at the same time, I deserved to win a big jackpot because things have been so bad. So it wasn't until having my homeless experience in Vegas for quite some time, and then a friend taking me in, and then kicked me out, a few weeks later because she insisted I was stealing from her, and then another friend taking me in, and then that person kicking me out because I couldn't pay my rent, and she didn't believe that I had a heart problem, which I actually did. She believed I was just lazy. And again, you've got that stigma you carry with you, and people are going to make judgments about you based on not just what you do, but who you are. And they consider what you've done before in the past and who you've been in the past to be who you are. So that's when I decided I have new glasses today. The glasses I've been wearing are the glasses that were scratched up and bent because I fell during an alcoholic blackout, and I face planted. I woke up in bed, bloody, had no memory of what happened, but those glasses were sort of a reminder of a position I put myself in, living my life the way I did. At that point, I decided that I would go to the doctor. I got Medicaid, and I went and was honest and began the journey to get not only my heart fixed, but mental health treatment. And I stopped drinking and, just began to deal with these issues that have been putting me on the street. It doesn't mean I, turned everything around and it was great. It meant that I began that journey. And that's been a little over a year now that I've been on that journey. So what you want to do is you want to take every step, every first day you've been homeless, and then write down the mistakes you made, write down the patterns that were bringing you to that point. And then you'll see a pattern, alcohol, drugs, abuse, mental illness. And then you can get into what we'll talk about next, and that's taking practical steps now that you're homeless to try to deal with those issues rather than just simply giving your life over to a series of well-meaning friends who give you a little bit of comfort and a bridge to your next homeless experience, because if you don't change, they're going to kick you out. if you don't change, you're going to fall even further. So that's what we'll talk about next. And thank you for your time, and stay homeless. Get your life right before you stop being homeless. That's it for today. Thank you. And by the way, you can always reach me. My email address is ron.moore.writer@gmail.com. And of course, on the YouTube site, you can connect with me there, and I'll be happy to talk to you or to help you out in any way I can. And if you recall, I'm not giving you my phone number because not because I don't want you to have it, but because I can never remember it. I had an MRI last night on my brain, so we'll see what that part of my journey starts to look like. So thank you for your patience on this very long video in this case, but I believe the information is important. I also believe it's important that if I ask you to reveal yourself, that I do the same thing. So until next time, that's it. Just stay strong out there.